ABC General Hospital spoilers reveal that Michael had spent so many months trying to rebuild a life defined by stability, responsibility, and the illusion of control that he never imagined how quickly all of it could begin to unravel the moment Willow decided to weaponize Jacinda's past. The shift happened subtly, at first small remarks, carefully placed doubts, quiet suggestions designed to dig beneath his defenses, but when Willow finally laid her threats bare, when she made it unmistakably clear that she was willing to drag Jacinda's history into the center of a custody war, Michael felt the ground under him tilt in a way he had not experienced since the darkest years of his life. Willow wasn't simply expressing concern, she was recalibrating the battlefield, adjusting every variable until Michael found himself cornered between the person he wanted to become and the ruthless strategist Willow had transformed into. Her warning was not shouted, not emotional, it was precise, deliberate, and terrifyingly calm. She would use Jacinda's past. She would present her arrests. She would drag the girl's trauma, mistakes, and survival into the fluorescent light of a courtroom. And she would do it without hesitation if it meant securing custody on her terms. In that moment, Michael saw how far she had fallen from the young woman he once believed he could trust. How far her desperation had twisted into something colder and sharper. Willow had convinced herself she was protecting Wiley and Amelia. But her methods had morphed into manipulation so refined that even Michael felt its weight press against his chest. The threat sat between them like a blade, silent gleaming, waiting for him to choose which side of it he was willing to bleed on. And the cruelest part was that it worked. Michael understood the legal reality far too well. A single mention of Jacinda's record could poison a judge's perception of him. It didn't matter that Jacinda had rebuilt her life. It didn't matter that her past arrests were rooted in survival, coercion, or circumstances. No one had ever bothered to question. Courts didn't measure nuance. They measured risk. And Michael knew Willow wouldn't hesitate to present Jacinda as a threat, even if it meant destroying someone who posed. No danger at all. The pressure consumed him in a way he hadn't expected. Every breath felt like a negotiation with himself. He replayed Willow's words, her unwavering gaze, the subtle lift of her chin that signaled she had already decided how this story would end if he refused to comply. The choice she placed before him was a trap disguised as responsibility to keep Jacinda, and risk losing access to his children, or cut Jacinda out of his life completely, preserving the family he'd built, but shattering the fragile happiness he'd rediscovered with her. That unbearable dilemma began to fracture something inside him. Michael had always fought to break free from the ruthless legacy of his family, but now he found himself being dragged back into a world where threats shaped outcomes and emotional leverage became currency. Willow was no longer asking him to choose wisely. She was forcing him to choose brutally. And the shock of that realization of seeing Willow adopt tactics once used against her hit Michael with a force that left him breathless. Their confrontation spiraled quickly, an emotional collision, years in the making. He demanded to know why she was willing to go so far. She insisted she was protecting their children. He accused her of using fear to gain power. She countered by saying he was putting the children's futures at risk. Every sentence carved deeper into the divide between them, transforming what should have been a difficult conversation into a battleground where neither was willing to retreat. Willow's tone sharpened with every word, revealing just how tightly she clung to the idea that she alone understood what was best. Michael's frustration swelled, pushed into something close to panic as he realized there was no appealing to her compassion anymore. She had replaced compassion with strategy, replaced trust with leverage, and everything in her posture told him she was ready to go further than he ever imagined. It was then that the chilling shock settled fully into him. Willow didn't just want custody. She wanted control. Control of the narrative, control of the children, control of Michael's choices. And the threat she held over Jacinda was not a tactic, it was a promise of war. Michael tried to fight back with logic, with reason, with pleas for understanding, but Willow dismissed each attempt like a lawyer brushing aside irrelevant evidence. She was no longer reacting, she was calculating. And Michael, for the first time, felt genuinely afraid not for himself but for Jacinda, a woman who had done nothing to deserve being dragged into a custody battle she never asked to be part of. He knew then what decision was coming for him, even if he hadn't yet admitted it aloud. If he stayed with Jacinda, Willow would destroy her in court. If he let Jacinda go, Willow would win, not because she was right, but because she understood exactly how to use Michael's heart against him. And this was the real danger. The real shift that terrified him. Willow had stopped fighting for her family and had begun fighting against anything that challenged her control. The confrontation ended without resolution, but the emotional fallout clung to Michael like smoke from a fire still burning. He walked away, shaken hollow and aware that the next step he took could alter the course of multiple lives. And as he stood alone, the weight of Willow's ultimatum pressing down on him, and he finally understood the truth. This wasn't just a disagreement. It was the beginning of a disaster, one triggered by fear, sharpened by desperation. and fueled by the knowledge that love, when twisted into weaponry, can destroy faster than hate ever could. And Willow, whether she realized it or not, had already lit the fuse. Willow's resolve had hardened into something unmovable, something sharp enough to fracture every fragile thread holding Michael's world together. She no longer hinted or suggested, she declared with a cold clarity that stunned even Michael, that Jacinda's past would become a weapon the moment he defied her. It was a threat wrapped in maternal justification, a demand disguised as concern. And Michael felt the pressure settling into his bones long before Willow said the words out loud, "Choose the children," or "choose her." From that moment, everything between them shifted into a slow-burning collision, one that neither could escape. Willow began to speak of Jacinda with a tone Michael had never heard before, a tone that painted Jacinda as a danger, as a stain on his credibility, as a risk his children could not afford. She spoke of judges, of court impressions, of how his association with a woman carrying multiple arrests would be viewed. Her logic was cold but irrefutable, her threat even colder. If Michael refused to end things with Jacinda, Willow would not hesitate to bring the dossier forward every arrest. Every charge, every humiliating detail ripped from the darkest corners of Jacinda's history. She would expose it in court and public records, in legal arguments designed to strip Michael of the moral ground he so desperately needed to stand on. The worst part was that Michael understood the power she held. He could see the courtroom, the judge's expression tightening as he read Jacinda's file. He could hear the DA's voice framing Michael as reckless, irresponsible, willing to expose his children to someone the system had once labeled a criminal. Even if Jacinda had rebuilt her life, even if her past was shaped by trauma rather than choice, the legal world cared only about ink on paper, and Willow knew it. She counted on it. From that moment on, every time Michael met Jacinda's eyes, he felt the weight of Willow's words pressing into him like a bruise. Wiley's laughter, Amelia's tiny hands wrapped around his shirt. The image of losing them, losing even partial custody, haunted every breath he took. And Willow knew exactly how deeply that fear cut him. She wielded it like a surgeon uses a scalpel, precisely, clinically, without hesitation. Jacinda felt the change even before Michael tried to speak it into existence. His hands trembled more often. His answers took longer. The warm certainty he once offered her now flickered like a candle exposed to wind. Jacinda didn't ask at first. She had learned long ago that when someone hesitated, it was because they were trying to protect her or preparing to abandon her. Both hurt the same. Still, she waited, hoping the storm she felt building around them would pass, hoping Michael would fight for what they'd begun to build. But feeling hope and believing in it were two different things. And Jacinda had lived too many years fearing that her past would eventually swallow her future whole. Now she watched it happening in real time. One night, when Michael finally began to explain, Jacinda didn't react with anger or tears. Instead, she listened with the quiet resignation of someone who had been punished repeatedly for sins she had already paid for. She didn't blame Michael, she blamed the life she escaped and the scars it left behind. Hearing Willow's accusations through Michael's strained voice cracked something inside her. Not because she believed Willow was right, but because she realized Willow had the power to destroy everything Michael held dear. And Jacinda cared far too deeply for him to allow that. The tragedy was that Michael had reached the same conclusion. He loved his children more fiercely than anything else. Their safety, their stability, their emotional well-being, he would sacrifice any part of himself to protect them, even his own happiness. Even Jacinda. The adjustment happening inside him was agonizing but undeniable. He wasn't choosing against Jacinda. He was choosing for Wiley and Amelia. Yet that distinction did nothing to lessen the pain tightening around his chest. Every instinct in him rebelled against Willow's manipulation, against her willingness to turn Jacinda's trauma into ammunition. But responsibility won, as it always did with Michael. And so the decision formed quietly, then painfully, until it became a certainty he could no longer deny he had to let Jacinda go. What he didn't know was that Jacinda had already made the same choice. In the days leading up to their breakup, she began to pull back. She stopped answering messages immediately, canceled plans with soft excuses, gave him smiles that didn't reach her eyes. She wasn't withdrawing because she didn't love him, she was withdrawing because she did. Too much. Enough to sacrifice what her heart wanted most. When she finally spoke, she said the words with a gentleness that nearly broke Michael's composure. She told him she wouldn't be the reason he lost his children. She wouldn't let her past become a weapon used against a man who had shown her more kindness than anyone had in years. She told him she loved him too much to stay. Michael hadn't expected it to hurt this badly. Watching Jacinda walk away, her steps slow but steady. Her shoulders drawn tight with silent grief felt like watching the universe collapse inward. He reached for her once instinctively, but stopped when he realized she was doing for him what he could not bring himself to do. She was ending the war, before it destroyed him. And yet the fallout was immediate. Willow felt she had won, but the victory came with consequences she didn't anticipate. Michael's eyes changed when he looked at her, losing warmth, losing softness. replaced by a quiet resentment that settled between them like smoke from an unseen fire. Carly watched the shift with growing alarm. Sunny felt it too, that Willow had ignited something dangerous inside Michael, a slow burn fury masked by silence. And Jacinda, she walked away believing she had lost everything, that her love had been swallowed by the shadows of her own past. But what she didn't see was how deeply Michael's world had cracked around him the moment she left. His sacrifice didn't feel noble, it felt like betrayal. Not betrayal of Willow, betrayal of himself. The emotional explosion that followed didn't happen all at once. It built layer by layer, Michael's guilt, Willow's tightening control, Jacinda's grief, the children's confusion, and now Port Charles seemed to hold its breath, sensing that something irreversible had begun. Because when someone is forced to choose between love and family, the scar doesn't disappear. It deepens, it spreads, it grows into something that eventually demands a reckoning. And for Michael, Willow, and Jacinda, that reckoning was no longer a possibility. It was a certainty, one that was already moving toward them like a storm no one could stop. Jacinda had spent her entire life running from the fragments of a past she could never fully understand. But when the truth finally surfaced, when she stood trembling and confessed that she was Nina's lost daughter, the entire world around her seemed to tilt violently. It was not just a revelation about parentage. It was the detonation of a secret powerful enough to reorder every relationship in her life. And the moment Jacinda admitted that she was not only Nina's child, but also Willow's biological sister, a shockwave hit Port Charles with the force of an emotional earthquake. Everything that had once been difficult suddenly became impossible. For Willow, the revelation was a brutal distortion of reality. The woman she had fought, judged, belittled, and targeted in the custody war was in truth the sister she never knew she had. The sister she had knowingly tried to destroy. And instead of softening her, instead of awakening some maternal or familial instinct, the truth pushed Willow into an even darker spiral of control and panic. Because this revelation did not merely change her past, it threatened her future. It meant that her attacks on Jacinda were not legal maneuvers, but betrayals of blood. It meant that Michael's relationship with Jacinda was not simply inconvenient, it was entangled in a family dynamic Willow could not tolerate. But the real catastrophe, the one that cracked the narrative wide open, arrived when Jacinda revealed the final piece of truth bursting inside her chest. She was pregnant with Michael's child. That single confession reshaped the battlefield completely. Michael's breath left him in one sharp exhale, his mind spinning through every consequence, every responsibility, every ripple this revelation created. He had ended things with Jacinda to protect his children, to survive Willow's threats, to keep his life from falling apart, but now suddenly another child waited in the shadows of that decision. A child he could not ignore. A child he could not abandon. A child who shifted the power dynamics of every argument Willow thought she had won. And Jacinda herself stood at the center of the storm, shaking but unbroken. Her voice trembling as she admitted that she had intended to walk away alone, to raise the baby without dragging Michael further into chaos. She had accepted her fate, the man she loved had chosen safety over her, and Willow's disdain had drowned any attempt at peace. But learning the truth about Nina and realizing that the child she carried was not only Michael's but also part of a deeply complicated family web made it impossible to disappear quietly anymore. Willow's reaction was instantaneous and devastating. Her face drained of color, then flushed with a fury she could no longer hide. The thought of Jacinda, her sister, carrying Michael's child was not merely upsetting. It was intolerable. This meant Jacinda would forever be tied to Wiley, and Amelia forever have a place at Michael's side. Forever remain in the orbit Willow had worked so ruthlessly to control. And worse, it meant Willow's power over Michael was slipping through her fingers. Her custody leverage, her legal threats, her moral superiority, all were now compromised by the existence of this unborn child. The fear tasted like acid. The anger felt like fire. Willow spiraled into denial first, then into accusation. She insisted the pregnancy was a manipulation, a lie, a tactic. But Michael saw the truth in Jacinda's eyes, the vulnerability that could not be faked, the heartbreak too raw to fabricate. Willow began to tremble with the realization that she no longer controlled the narrative. The family she constructed through sheer force of will was fracturing even as she tried to tighten her grip. And for the first time, Michael saw her fear for what it truly was, not concern for the children, but terror of losing him. Michael felt something shift inside him, a deep recalibration that changed his alignment entirely. The guilt he carried for ending things with Jacinda, the resentment he held toward Willow for manipulating him, the shock of learning he was going to be a father again, it all converged into a moment of clarity that sliced through him like a blade. He had allowed Willow to corner him, to dictate his choices, to force him into emotional submission. But the presence of this unborn child awakened something stronger than guilt, stronger than fear. A father's instinct. A protector's purpose. A refusal to let mistakes repeat themselves. At the same time, Jacinda's identity shift created its own emotional chaos. She was no longer the outsider, the girl with a troubled past, the threat Willow painted her to be. She was a daughter of Nina, a woman whose legacy in Port Charles was powerful, messy, complicated, and deeply rooted. And she was Willow's sister, bonded by blood they never asked for but could no longer deny. The psychological weight of that truth settled into Jacinda's chest like a storm. Every moment of judgment from Willow, every harsh word, every attack suddenly carried the sting of familial betrayal, a sister punishing a sister without knowing. Yet the most volatile element of all was the child. Because the baby growing inside Jacinda instantly became the catalyst for a new war, a custody war, a family war. A war of identity and inheritance. Michael's world was no longer divided between love and responsibility. It now demanded he confront both simultaneously. And Willow, sensing the shift, felt her control collapsing. The emotional explosion was inevitable. Willow accused Jacinda of timing the announcement for maximum damage. Jacinda held her ground, refusing to be shamed. Michael stepped between them, not as Willow's protector, but as Jacinda's defender. And that was the moment Willow saw the truth flash in his eyes. He wasn't hers to control anymore. This was the adjustment no one prepared for: Michael choosing responsibility over manipulation, Jacinda choosing courage over shame, and Willow forced to face the consequences of every threat she had thrown like daggers. The power she once wielded so easily now slipped through her fingertips as the family structure reshaped itself around. A new center, the unborn child, the symbol of a future no one expected. Port Charles felt the shock immediately. Nina sensed something shifting before Jacinda even spoke. Carly recognized the fear in Michael's posture, and those closest to Willow watched her transformation into someone cornered by her own schemes. Because this wasn't simply a pregnancy scandal. It was the collapse of the story Willow forced into existence, and the beginning of a far more chaotic chapter 1, fueled by bloodlines, betrayal, redemption, and the fierce battles that erupt when love and control collide. And as Jacinda placed a hand over her stomach as Michael realized he had just become a father again, as Willow's voice cracked with the weight of losing everything she thought she had secured, Port Charles braced for the explosion none of them could stop.